Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. There's a whole bunch this week, so I'm just going to jump right in. First up, FirebrandX wanted to clarify Jake's question from last week about how the OSSC handles aspect ratio correction, so I'll just read through his comment for anybody listening audio only. First, with the FrameMeister, just download the profiles, although there is no Wii profiles yet, and those should be fine. Second, with respect to the open source scan converter, optimal timing profiles pretty much force you into a specific aspect ratio. Most of these are square pixels, but there are a couple of options like 256 by 240 having an optional pseudo 4x3 mode that isn't quite accurate on line 4x. There's also now aspect correction on 384 by 224, where in line 4x mode the vertical is scaled 4x and the horizontal scaled to 3x, which makes for a much more reasonable aspect ratio. Similarly, 512 by 240 does a 4x vertical in line 4x, with the horizontal scaled to 2x. This ends up looking like uncorrected NES or SNES though, but still way better than looking at a 512 by 240 image in square pixels. Yeah, that'd be way too wide. If people want to sacrifice that crisp digital look that you can get with optimal timings, you could just set it to generic 4x3 mode for whatever line multiplier you use, and then change the optimal timings in that mode to stretch the image however you want. The only problem is you're going to need a forgiving display for this, otherwise it'll just blank out, which anybody that's ever messed with the timings have probably had that problem before. Or you would, if you're doing video capture, you would have to change it through the post-processing or an OBS. So for me personally, whenever I do video captures for things like this, it's infinitely easier because if I either go direct into my data path card or I use the OSSC in whatever the most pixel perfect mode is, and then I manipulate it afterwards. You could do it in real time in OBS, but obviously everything you do after that, you could do a multi-pass run on something that's going to look better. But if you're just playing on your TV, FBX is right. So what I'm hoping is that somebody is eventually going to come out with an HDMI 4K scaler, which of course would also be able to do 1080p as well. That way people could just dial in pixel perfect profiles on the OSSC and then let this other scaler deal with aspect correction. I think that would be something that realistically you could probably see within a few years. Obviously, the most ideal scenario would be to have a 4K version of the OSSC that also can detect what resolutions are coming and automatically correct it. And then, of course, have the option of a frame buffer. If if the way the image looks is more important than latency, then maybe you could throw on a 1-frame buffer and go from there. But that's all speculation. What FirebrandX said is more of a today explanation. So thanks very much for chiming in. Andrew Moore said that they're looking for a modder who would be willing to update your NES top loader's NES RGB board with the latest firmware for dejitter. Every modder I've talked to just wants me to update to the 2.0 board. The firmware instructions are right there. So the reason that the modders keep saying that is because you can't update an older board with the newer dejitter firmware. It's hardware and software on there. So what you're looking to do is impossible. What you could do is add a dejitter board to the setup. It's not as clean as replacing it with a newer board, but you could obviously resell the old one. So depending on where you're at and how comfortable you are with eBay, you might actually be able to save money by just selling your old board on eBay. List it used, old board, no dejitter. People will still buy it. I'd probably buy it as a spare. But swapping it out with the newest one, or you could just buy the dejitter boards and have your modder install that. And that should help if you're having issues with the OSSC or direct capture or anything like that. And as far as can I recommend a modder, I would just try to contact anybody that's close to you in your area that has a good reputation. If there aren't any, maybe people could chime in the comments if you let us know where you are, but it's kind of hard to recommend people because you're either shipping your consoles out. Some of the best modders usually have a very long backlog, which pisses people off, which, it's just the way life is. So to give me a little more idea of where you're located, I could try to help, but the modders you were talking to were right. They probably just didn't explain it correctly. DemonBoy had a couple of questions, and I'll start from the bottom up. First, is adding a Unibios for the Neo Geo sort of redundant if I plan to purchase a Neo SD Pro? So this is debatable, and it's a debate I have all the time with my Neo Geo friends. But there's 2 or 3 different answers to this question. First, if you play a lot of original carts, then you should probably just get it. If you're really only planning on playing on the ROM cart, which most of my friends that are Neo Geo collectors, like their favorite game that they play all the time, they definitely still use that, and they probably have multiple copies, but they all use the ROM cart because they don't want to wear out their rare, expensive carts. So even if you have a full Neo Geo collection, point is, if you plan on only using the ROM cart, then if you have an AES console, I'd say no, you don't need a Unibios at all. Get that's Neo BIOS Master save card. I had one of them in front of me before. They're out of stock now, but you could use that for saves if you care about save games. And then everything else from the Unibios you could do on the ROM cart, and you're good to go. If you're using an MVS, almost all the same things are true in that, if you're using mostly real carts, then yeah, you should probably look into the Unibios. If you're predominantly going to use a ROM cart, maybe not. However, with the MVS, if your model board, like if it's an MV1B or C, the smaller ones, if your board doesn't have a save slot and you're into save games, which isn't that much of a big deal on Neo Geo, but just putting this info out there, there's a board out there that I think it's out of stock now, but I'll be doing a write-up the moment it comes into stock. But you basically disable the BIOS chip on the MVS, you drop this board over it, and you stick a Unibios in it. And not only is it the Unibios, but it's a save game thing. It's like a flash save system. So it's not removable. You can't take the saves with you like you would on an AES. But if you have an MV1C or an MV1B and saves are important to you, you'd want to get that anyway. So the short version of that is, if you're only going to be using the ROM cart, no, I wouldn't bother with it unless it's an MVS and you want saves as well. Not save states, just regular save games. Next question, thinking of adding a Dreamcast to the collection, but just like every other time I add a new console to the mix, I'm overthinking how to connect everything for the best experience. Yeah, join the club. So you said you have a 20L5 with a G-SCART switch. So you have nothing to think about. You have you only have 2 choices, and it's going to get even easier in a second. Retro Access and Retro Gaming Cables makes a SCART cable with a switch on it that handles everything except the games that are not compatible with VGA or RGB. Back to that in a second. Because you have a 20L5, the ones from Retro Gaming Cables will work. The only problems the Retro Gaming Cables one have is with Sony D and A series BVMs, not with the 20L5 PVM. So you could buy that one right now. It's in stock, I'm pretty sure. Or you could wait for the Retro Access one to go back in stock in 3 weeks or something, whenever they're back from their vacation. Well-deserved break, in my opinion. Theirs is compatible with everything. So I guess it's not a big deal if you don't ever plan on getting a D or A series BVM or don't mind upgrading the cable later. But everything else, so your 20L5, the OSSC, everything else this cable works with. So that's as easy as it gets. And as far as some of the games that are not compatible with VGA or RGB, that's a problem you would run into no matter what the solution was, unless you're using a DC HDMI. And that's really overkill for analog. If Dreamcast is by far your favorite system of all time, there's some crazy things that you could do with the DC HDMI back into an RGB setup, but it doesn't sound like it is if you're just adding to it now. If you're just a fan and not like a crazy super fan, I honestly would just use that cable and then grab a composite video cable for the games that can't be patched. You say you're using a GDMU, so not original discs, so you should be able to get RGB patches for all the games that support it, and I don't think there are very many others that you would have to worry about. So that's it. That's basically it. Grab one of those 2 cables. If you need it today, there's only one in stock, so there makes your decision for you. And just try to patch the games aren't compatible. So that one is actually much easier than you would have to worry about. And lastly, you had a bunch of very nice things to say, so thank you very much. That's much appreciated. BadReality had a question about HD Retrovision's upcoming Sega Dreamcast component cables, and I had a hard time understanding some of your wording. I think I got what you meant, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But it sounds like you're asking, first of all, are they still developing the cable? Yes, and there's always been steady progress. It's just there's very often stuff where Steve will, go full speed ahead testing and developing, and then send something to the company and have to wait a month back in order to get test samples. So they're pushing hard, but they're also perfectionists, so it is still in development. It's getting close to release. I bust their chops about it every time I talk to them, so hopefully soon. But the actual question that you had, which I think you had, is will the Sega Dreamcast component cables from HD Retrovision be different to using a good quality RGB cable like the one from Retro Access or Retro Gaming Cables through a RGB to component converter? I think that's what you meant. You mentioned things like versus a soldered printed circuit board, but they're both soldered printed circuit boards. So I think your question is just simply, is it better to get the HD Retrovisions, or can you use SCART through a converter? My technical answer to that is the HD Retrovisions are almost always going to be better because they're designed to solve the problems of that specific console and not to do the generic conversion. However, it's situation based, in my opinion. So let's say, for example, you have all SCART cables and no component whatsoever, and you have an OSSC and a Sony PVM and a consumer grade TV, let's just say, and you're routing one of your G-SCART outputs to like a Sony PVM, and from that to the OSSC, beautiful. And then you have another output going into a component video converter for a consumer grade TV. In that scenario, it's going to be the same because you're not going to really notice the difference on a consumer grade TV, and it's better to just get the RGB cable because your main setup's in RGB and it's only an aside for the consumer grade CRT. I think maybe a more realistic scenario is OSSC and consumer grade TV, but it's the same point in that it's just ease of use, right? And unless your consumer CRT is like completely calibrated, convergent strips, new capacitors, unless you really go to some serious efforts, it would be hard to tell smaller differences that are normally only noticeable on flat screens or higher line count monitors. However, if you have an all-component video setup, I would just obviously stick with the HD Retrovisions because there's a lot of things built into these that are really designed to solve specific and annoying problems. And the generics just aren't designed for that. And they shouldn't be either. They should be designed to take a variety of signals in RGB and spit them out in component with the best quality possible. So my answer to you is simply let your situation decide and stick with whatever cable is your prominent cable. And if you have a full RGB setup and a full component setup, then just get the HD Retrovisions when they come out, unless you're in a rush. I guess that's the only caveat to that, because I have no idea when they're coming out. There's no expected release date. It is when it is. So, that obviously then would be a pretty easy decision. Then just get the SCART cable and the converter now, because there is no other good choice. But yeah, it's more of a situational thing. And one of the many reasons I haven't done the RGB to component converter episode that I've been wanting to do for a year and a half now is because it is kind of hard to put up the HD Retrovisions against a generic, because they're so specifically designed for the console that they go into that there are some scenarios which it would look identical, and there are some scenarios which it might look identical, but it might not perform, like it might not be as compatible using the generic. There's a whole bunch of ifs, ands, or buts, but overall, I would just say let your scenario decide, and I'll, as soon as they're available, put the Dreamcast cables really through their paces. Adam Cameron posted a question, and I'm having a hard time understanding this one too. I'm so sorry. I'm sure it's just me today. I sat in jury duty all day yesterday, so my brain is probably mush from that. So let me try and translate in words that I'll understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But you said you have SCART cables from Retro Gaming Cables plugged into the RGB to comp transcoder, the RetroTank RGB to component transcoder. Now, right there, you don't say how they're plugged in. Are they plugged in directly? Are you running it through a G-SCART switch? Are you running it through one of the lower quality switches? But that's part one, is you got that going into the RGB to comp. then from that into a G comp switch 8x2, and from that into, I guess, a TV. You just said a TV. You didn't say, is there more than one? Is there an OSSC involved? Is it a consumer grade TV? But continuing, as soon as you apply power to just the transcoder, the screen starts flickering purple and green. But when you apply power to any of the consoles, it shows an awesome image. No flicker, looks like it's supposed to. Weird thing is, it doesn't do this when plugged directly into the TV. So once again, what's the scenario? Is it are you just skipping the G-comp switch and going directly into the TV? Are you skipping the input side of things? Is there anything else plugged into it? I'm so sorry. I'm not nitpicking. I'm not trying to tease you or anything, but you're definitely missing a lot of critical info in here. Maybe this is just my IT nerd troubleshooting coming back, but to continue, I guess what you meant is it makes you think the transcoder is always sending something, and the TV can't find sync because there is none because the console's powered off. You said I now see but don't think I did before my HD Retrovision cable plugged into Genesis 2 flickers the same for a second as long as you power on the console, but not all the time with power off. Yeah, I really don't understand anything of what's going on. I'm so sorry. I swear I'm not trying to be mean or pick on you or anything, but I just can't understand what's going on at the moment. So if you just lay it out in more basic terms, like what are all your inputs? What are all your outputs? What are you plugging them into? What are the order that you're plugging things into? There's a lot of things that could be going on that are completely normal, and some things sound strange. So if you wouldn't mind just re-asking the question and just kind of wording it differently. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to bust chops or anything like that. I'm just really having a hard time visualizing everything. It's on me. I'm the one that's probably not fully with it today. So my apologies, Adam. Just I really don't know how to help without more info. Well, that's it for this week. I guess I thought there were more questions, but there were actually a bunch of replies, so this one was shorter than I thought. But whatever, I don't really care how long they are. I always enjoy doing them, whether it's one question or 100, whatever. I'll do my best. Also, sorry, maybe I'm not so sharp today. Maybe I'm still kind of brain dead from sitting in jury duty waiting to get picked yesterday. Luckily, that's all over with, so I don't have to deal with that anymore. But anyway, if you are new to these Q&As, please ask any question at all you would like wherever you support in the latest Q&A post. The way these things work, I turn off comments on the YouTube videos because this is really just a thank you to all of you who support. And I can't go back and search through the other videos for comments. There's not really an easy way to do that. So if I missed your question, which is always an accident, never on purpose, please just re-ask in the latest Q&A post and I'll get to it next week. So as always, thank you so much for all your support, and I will see you next week.